Came. There arose across this nation people thinking one and the same, and they woke to find their freedoms and all their liberties had gradually been taken away. And when they realized the danger to their posterity, I heard those patriotic people say, we want this country back. We ain't just joking, Jack. We want our liberty and our dignity and our freedoms and our rights restored. We want this country back. She's been driven way off track. We're wide awake and we're madder than hell now, and we ain't gonna take it. How can I convince you when your ears refuse to hear? You turn your heart away from me each time when I draw near. Your eyes refuse to meet with mine, they glance away in fear, as if you should not look at your reflection in the mirror. How can I explain to you when you won't understand? You scoff me and you mock me and reject the truth at hand. You spread your vicious rumors all across this troubled land. You willfully and knowingly transgress from his command. Your mind has been made up for you by people you don't know, whose thought machines control the scene so well it doesn't show. How can I contain this anguish and this pain, knowing that your eyes are blinded by the lies? Have your eyes been blinded by the lies? Have your eyes been blinded by the lies? Yes, your eyes are blinded by the lies. Yes, your eyes are blinded by the lies.
Tonight for the first time at Global Sciences, and I'm certainly glad that they're with us, because as always we need to know this. The first one up will be M.Phillips, and will you welcome Mark here tonight, please?
Thank you, Dean. Thank you very much, Dean. We appreciate this opportunity, and we appreciate all the work that you and all of your workers have done to bring us to a point to where we can inform those that need the information most, those with ears to hear and eyes to see. And also, Joyce, thank you for the wonderful plug. That book was well laid. The information that you're going to hear tonight will rival any Stephen King novel for horror. We hope that we voice no negatives without providing you a solution. Over the next 2 days, we'll have an opportunity to provide you folks with a lot of information that has taken literally decades for myself to acquire and a lifetime for Cathy O'Brien. First of all, allow myself to introduce myself. I'm Mark Phillips. I was born May the 17th, 1943 in Nashville, Tennessee. My father was involved in the newspaper business. My mother was a housewife. She was injured severely when I was about 6 years old, and it was a brain trauma. She lost much of her ability to logically reason. She lost her memory, and she lost her ability to smell and taste. My mother was more or less a victim of a very tragic accident, but whether she realizes it or not, she provided me with the impetus to research mind-brain functions. Through her injury, she provided me an avenue that would take me in a direction that not many people have been and have survived to stand before you. In 1967, when the Vietnam War was heating up, and I believed firmly, as a very patriotic young man, that I should serve in some capacity, but certainly I had no intentions of becoming an infantryman. I didn't have the grades to become a pilot or some of those other glamorous military jobs. So I pursued an avenue that would keep me out of the line of fire, but nevertheless allow me the opportunity to serve my country. I applied for a job with a company called the Ampex Corporation out of Redwood City, California. Many of you know them as magnetic tape and electronic equipment, very sophisticated electronics. They invented the instant replay equipment that you see every day on television, on sports news, and that sort of thing. They also were the ones responsible for developing studio-grade video equipment, video taping equipment. In the process of developing all of these exotic patents and products for the commercial industry, they also had some consumer goods, and they also had some extraordinarily large Department of Defense contracts. When I applied for the job with Ampex, and because it would offer a deferment, I was one of about 490 people that applied for that job. What got me the job was certainly not my academic accomplishments. Many of the young men that were applying and young women had college degrees, specifically targeted towards that particular interest and industry. But I was also given a battery of tests, much like the tests that are administered in officers' candidate school for the military. That test revealed some information that was totally unbeknownst to me, but definitely provided the government, and I failed to mention, that even though I was hired by Ampex Corporation, I was actually working for the Defense Department in a joint venture with Ampex Corporation. That information that I provided them through testing, in essence, told them that I could keep a secret. In essence, it told them that I was probably one of the best candidates for that job because I would soon be the recipient of a top-secret clearance. I would be involved in the actual videotaping and monitoring of tests, experiments, and projects involving MK Ultra. Many of you in this room know who we are. Many in this room know about mind control. Many of you know about MK Ultra, but not all. Even though MK Ultra was exposed in 1977, most people are not aware that the project actually began in the 1930s. Not as named MK Ultra. It's had a variety of names. The current name I'm not familiar with. 1930s, both on this continent and in Europe, there was a quest being made to develop a weapon system that would control the world. Well, this is nothing new. Mankind's been doing this for thousands of years. What made this weapon system so unique is the fact that both working on it, I would say we, the United States government, in tandem with many of our allies at that time, as well as Germany. Adolf Hitler gave Boring the charge of developing nuclear weaponry. He gave his sidekick, Heinrich Himmler, the charge of developing mind control. Because mind control, once the minds of the people were won, costly and expensive weaponry would not even have to be developed. Hitler favored mind control, much as Ronald Reagan did when he stood up before his people some 5 decades later in California and informed us that he wanted to institute mind control in the prison system because he felt it was a way to benevolently rehabilitate otherwise non-rehabilitatable persons. So you can see that my association early on, although it dealt primarily with primates, I worked at the Yerkes Primate Center on the Emory University campus most of the time. My office offices were located in Atlanta, Georgia. It was convenient. I also spent a great deal of time in about 15 other states working on military bases, mental institutions, and state and federal prisons. But what I saw were volunteers. What I saw were people who were terribly, terribly dysfunctional, who were actually benefiting by some behavioral modification programs that NASA and the Defense Department was developing, I thought, for the purposes of bettering our space program. Now, the primates that were involved in this program, they really received a wonderful existence. I really get worried about people talking about frying the monkeys. I've become just totally disenchanted with the idea that animals are being tortured. I happen to be an animal lover myself, and could not have tolerated it had it been going on. These animals, these apes, were treated with more dignity and more respect than the human beings that I saw in the penitentiary and mental institution settings. They were being trained a language skill so that they could communicate in case we had to substitute apes for astronauts, in case there was an accident. And of course there was, but Congress did not force that upon NASA. This will give you some background as to what I was thinking, because many of you out there, I'm sure, very curious if I was actually a victim of mind control, because I work so closely with it. Nowadays, I understand I would have been. Nowadays, I understand that there would be no options, and I would lose my ability to logically reason and remember. You see, memory was the #1 focus of the Defense Department. And I worked with scientists that constantly reminded me that they could make me remember or they could make me forget. But only if I didn't understand the formula. You see, the writings of St. John, the truth shall make you free. It's absolute truth. Once you understand mind control, and you understand some of the things that are physical signs and psychological signs, there's not a person in this room that could not protect themselves to some degree. There are exotic types of electronic mind control or thought control that none of us have an immunity to. But at least we'd be able to remember it if it happened to us. The type of mind control that I'm going to be discussing, and Cathy O'Brien is going to be demonstrating through her testimony of what happened to herself and her daughter, is absolute mind control. As far back as the dawn of man, there have been writings, wherever there's been recorded history, of secret knowledge that empowered certain individuals enormous control over their fellow man. This was the information that in the 1930s was being studied in this country and simultaneously being studied in Germany. The families of multi-generational incest survivors, I know each one of you understands the term incest. Multi-generational means it's carried on from one generation to the next. Multi-generational incest survivors develop a variety of changes in their personas, in the way they think. Believe it or not, their IQ goes up. It's a dreadful thing to think that if someone's child is abused, their IQ is elevated as a result of that abuse. But everyone in the scientific community understood that. Many of these scientists did this to their own families, just to raise the IQ of their own children. So during the 30s and the 40s, experimentation, and it was experimentation at that time, horrors of mental health. As a result of that, mental health, being the youngest of all the healing arts, began to suffer from something that they didn't even know about, and that is the information, the research that was done on college and university campuses nationwide in this country was being withheld from the mental health community. Soon there was born an organization, a lobby organization in the 50s, known as the American Psychiatric Association. It was formed by a psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Ewing Cameron. Dr. Cameron was a brilliant mind. He's regarded by many as being a brilliant Nazi mind. There have been a variety of books written about this fellow and a variety of statements. I actually had the opportunity to meet this man. He's deceased now. But he was operating a mental hospital in Montreal, Canada in the 60s. This particular mental institution was like many that all of us are familiar with or may be familiar with. Most of the patients came in, stayed for a short period of time, and then whatever their brain chemistry was that needed to be adjusted or whatever the psychological problem was addressed, and they were on their way out the door, usually in better condition than they came in. But while Dr. Cameron was there, he proceeded under the contractual agreement with the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States to actually begin a regimen of very specific traumas. Now, when we're talking about trauma tonight, we're talking about voltage, DC voltage, not AC like it's coming out of the wall. That destroys your brain real quick. This is direct current. We're talking about extraordinarily high voltages with low amperages. We're talking about designer drugs, things that none of you have heard or seen in your lifetime unless you've bothered to traverse East Africa and parts of Brazil where these exotic compounds were actually in use by witch doctors and medicine people. Not necessarily for the purposes the CIA had in mind. Excuse me. The compounds, the chemical compounds that were being developed, I saw nothing but the results. To me, they looked like so much liquid in a vial or so much powder in a capsule. And for what I was seeing was improvement in these people that were supposedly volunteers. To this day, I don't know whether they were volunteers or not. The point remains the same, though. Most improved. Most became functional. And these were people that had been incarcerated in mental institutions and prisons that could not leave because they were a threat to themselves or society. But through this behavioral modification program that I was involved in, and the drugs that they were given, and the low voltage that was administered to them, not high. In tandem with this, and even hypnosis, these people improved. I saw mind control as being the greatest single advance to help mankind. Evolved through a technological maze of confusion that seemed to be holding us all in some kind of invisible grip. Our mental institutions were filling up from stressed out people. Our prisons were filling up because of dysfunctional persons. And then I saw this method for relieving this problem, and I thought it was absolutely the greatest thing a man could ever witness. So you see, it was easy for me to keep a secret for about 17 and a half years. I left Ampex Corporation and went to work for a NASA spin-off company. It was nothing but NASA scientists. They opened up their offices in a little town called Tullahoma, Tennessee. Their company was called Laser Systems and Electronics. and I was installed as the director of marketing of the medical division. Well, there was no other division, but they called it the medical division. We manufactured an array of telemetry equipment. Today it's commonplace. In those days it was unheard of. But it was to monitor all systems. It could monitor us to a certain degree. They could monitor thought, emotions, emotional swings. There was a separate branch of heart monitoring telemetry that the company excelled in. The rest of the equipment was strictly a research project, and it was never placed on the open market. Laser Systems and Electronics developed all of the products. They were an over-the-counter traded corporation. And after a period of time, they were sold. I had been maintaining a high-level clearance from Ampex to Laser Systems, and it seemed like that I would want to get out of this business because all I saw was mental institutions and prisons. It was very depressing. And I commented to a cohort friend of mine who was an engineer, he's a scientist, that I'd like something a little more glamorous, and he said, why not the airline business? I thought that was a marvelous idea, except I didn't know any airline people. I had run a few junkets, gambling junkets, to supplement my income while I lived in Atlanta, and had made a few friends in the casinos in Las Vegas, and one or two people that I knew on very low-level jobs with the airlines, but nobody that could help me find a job in an executive capacity. No sooner had I told this one person, who I now know worked for the Central Intelligence Agency, what I wanted to do, then a job appeared. And I received a nice letter and a phone call from the senior vice president of Capital International Airways. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out the alphabet initials. That's my excuse. I was not a rocket scientist. I worked around them. It never dawned on me. I'm standing before you looking just plumb foolish. But in order to make all this make any sense at all, this groundwork needs to be laid, because the rest of this story is going to get more complicated as we go. When I went to work for Capital International Airways, there was an inside information source, since I was third from the top. We had about 2,500 employees. Most of them were crew members. Very little ground support. We did not maintain regular terminal sites. We floated around. We were a supplemental airline. Flew a lot of MAC flights. Those are military air command flights. But I often heard the term company business and corporation business. In company business, you cooperate. In corporation business, you perform. I was fortunate to have been in a situation once again where I was not becoming a victim or a stool pigeon. But we were involved in a project that has now emerged, thank God, through Freedom of Information Act information and through a courageous Washington correspondent by the name of Linda Hunt, who wrote a book called Secret Agenda, Project Paperclip. I was part of that project. And that project entailed the transportation, importation of Nazi and fascist scientists from all over the world for over 41 years. These scientists were the best of the best, but for whatever reason, their identities had to be changed. They had to be merged into our universities, our teaching, learning schools, through large corporations, through military contractors. They were placed in extraordinary positions that really did nothing. They were research scientists. they had fake positions. We were bringing these people in, and I can tell you, those airplanes were large. And I can tell you that from memory, I can think of hundreds of flights where there were a number of these people being brought in from the four corners of the earth and merged into our society. They're still here. These folks were the propulsion experts, primarily from Nazi Germany and from the Soviet Union, from Italy, from France, from wherever we could find them. They were also psychiatrists. A much larger percentage were psychiatrists and neuroscience experts. What I couldn't understand then, that I understand all too well now, is why we were sneaking in psychiatrists. These people they have had more education than any other the job requires. They have spent more time in school learning, less than any of the learning professions, medical professions, that is. We had many years of this. One day, the office was literally stormed by FBI and Secret Service. They weren't wearing the uniforms that they wear these days. These are all suits. And my boss called me into his office. He said, "We have roughly 5 minutes to talk. I must tell you something. We are in deep trouble. This airline has been involved in some covert activity, and it cannot get beyond this point. It must be contained." He said, "There is a problem within the company." I thought he was referring to capital. And I said, "Who's the problem?" He said, "I don't know. And we'll never know." I said, "Of course we will. It's easy to find out." He said, No. Company, CIA." I said, "Oh." I asked him, I said, "Are we working for the CIA?" I believe if that man had remained my boss, I would have received a demotion at the point that he looked at me and he said, "Our 5 minutes is up." Well, the U.S. Marshals came in and they put great big seals on all the files. And they took me off in a corner. And they said, "What do you know about this, Mr. Phillips?" I said, "I have not a clue as to what's going on here." I said, "But I can assure you I've done nothing wrong. You go and look at my desk." I said, "As a matter of fact, I maintain the security drawer. It's a safe for all confiscated drugs, and there must be a couple $100,000 worth of confiscated drugs in my desk. I thought I'd better tell you that now." I said, "But they belong to the DEA, and the seal is on them." He said, "This is not about drugs. This is about something far more sinister. And we're told that you don't know anything about it. So we're going to place you in the position of maintaining the integrity of these files." I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "It means that if any of your company cohorts pop these seals, you're going to prison." That was one of the most uncomfortable things I'd ever experienced, because my boss told me to get the locksmith from New York down there immediately, or I was going to lose my life. So if I didn't cooperate with my boss, I would die. If I didn't cooperate with the feds, I was going to prison. Immediately, I felt like the patsy that I thought I was going to be 15 years previous. It worked out very well. My boss got a call from the President of the United States, and he very casually came out and said, "It's over." And I said, "Don't let them touch those seals. Wait, just wait." He said, "Okay, they're going to come out here and remove them, and they're going to bring back many boxes of material." The truth of the matter was, we had managed to get into the files, and we did remove all of the sensitive material before the feds could have detected it. And the seals, even though they had been broken, they'd been repaired expertly. I was absolutely in a state of shock. I asked for a vacation. I got a vacation. You see, Pan Am and Lufthansa decided to collide 747s in the Canary Islands. And there was a little over 800 bodies scattered all over that little tiny airport. So they sent me over there for my sunny vacation off the coast of Africa. I decided the airline business was absolutely not anything like that I had imagined. A fellow by the name of George Kamatz, a Russian fellow, he headed up an airline by the name of Air America. He came to Capitol to take over because after we experienced this, my boss developed serious nervous problems too. He owned the airline and he retired. So he brought in George Kamatz, probably the most evil fellow I have ever met. But he liked me. And I was so thankful because I was desperately trying to find another job. Well, he told me, he said, "How would you like to go to Alaska?" And I said, "Fine, anywhere." He said, "Well, we're going to open up an airline up there." He said, "I won't be there but a month or two. You'll like the people you're working with." He said, "They're all out of Evergreen." I said, "Evergreen, CIA." He said, "Everybody's CIA. In the transportation and communications business, don't you know anything?" So I went to Alaska, and we started an airline known as Great Northern Airlines. Great Northern was flying over Wien Air Alaska's routes while they were on strike. It seems as though Wien didn't want to cooperate with the CIA, and the CIA pulled something inside, and it had something to do with how many persons were in that cockpit flying. And Wien demanded that there be 3 people in the cockpit, and the FAA went along with the CIA and said, "No, 2's enough." So we began to fly over Wien's routes. Once again, I was met head-on with a number of very angry people who were determined to take their anger out on the first suit they saw. And I was it. I didn't know you didn't wear a 3-piece suit in Alaska. I didn't know that this was a source of instant visual agitation. I soon learned, and the only and last time that I can ever recall being involved in a fight with a very angry ramp person and a pilot who were determined to kill me. Fortunately, one of them slipped and I outrun the other one. This led me into a situation to where I made the decision arbitrarily, I've got to go in business for myself. I cannot get away from the CIA. So as quickly as my contract was up, on the day that it expired, because in 24 hours it was renewed automatically, I put my car, my wife, my things, my pets on a ship, and I fled to the United States, determined this time that I wouldn't take a job referral from anybody. I was very fortunate. I've always been fortunate in business. I'm probably the luckiest human being you all will ever have before you because of what I've been involved with and the fact that I haven't been hurt. Cathy O'Brien likes to refer to herself as lucky, and I told her, I said, "You remind me of the story about the dog with his right front paw missing and his left eye gouged out, freshly castrated, and he's missing. And the sign says, he'll answer to the name of Lucky." I really was lucky. I was very fortunate. And I firmly believe nothing happens by chance. I believe there's a purpose for what we're supposed to do. And we are given opportunities to choose, to make decisions, to go one way or another in life. My decision to go the route that I took provided me an education that I thought I would never use. It provided me with skills that, quite frankly, I didn't know would ever be needed. Mind control and brain functions was still my number one interest, but I needed a medical degree in order to pursue it any further than I had. Since I'd been involved in transportation, the natural evolution for me was to go into travel and tourism. I was approached by Donna Tuttle, who was the Undersecretary for Travel and Tourism under Carter. And she offered me a job in Washington. I said, no. Thank you very much for the letter. I'm going to frame it. I said, I don't want to work with the government anymore. I've seen enough. I've experienced enough. And you people don't know that I'm not cut out for this. So I became involved in the travel and tourism business. And around 1986, I was introduced by a fellow that I had long since separated from friendship-wise to a man who was involved in the country music business. I'm not a country music fan. I like classical music. I have nothing against people that listen to it, but not in my house. This fellow's name was Alex Houston. He was a hypnotist, stage hypnotist. Well, I'm a hypnotist. But I don't believe in stage hypnosis any more than I would suggest clinical abortions being done as a form of entertainment. Hypnosis is very serious to me. And it's a wonderful gift. It's a wonderful art, a healing art. I know many of you know about it in this room. Most of the places we've spoken, I usually just omit the word hypnosis because people get scared. Hypnosis is focus. That's all it is. It's redirecting the focus. Alex Houston approached me with an idea. He said, you have all these international connections. You have connections in the State Department. Well, I thought this was normal that he would know this because my friend could have told him. These connections are all that Alex Houston wanted to tap into. I told him that I was most interested if it was a legitimate opportunity and if it did not require enormous funding on my part. He said it required no funding on my part. All it required is my contacts overseas. Who did I know in China? I said, absolutely nobody. But I've got people in high places that know people in low places. What do you have to sell? He said, these are capacitor banks, huge capacitor banks that are used to conserve energy, particularly where you've got giant motors. Without going into a lot of engineering jargon, in essence, the Chinese were very concerned, since they had lifted their so-called Iron Curtain, they could not meet the needs of their countrymen, much less export anything, because they were having to shut their factories down on alternate dates, and the mines because of energy shortages. And this would resolve part of their energy shortage problem. So I told Mr. Houston that if he'd give me a few months, I'd put together a marketing plan that I'd done it before, and it was very successful. And I'd put together a sales plan. If he would help me with providing me with engineers to put the production information together, and we'd go make a presentation to the Chinese. We did just that. The Chinese were so excited over what we presented them that they handed me a $31 million contract. I failed to tell you. I did tell Mr. Houston that I would not work with him unless I was president of the company. You see, I'm a graphologist. His handwriting said he was crook. Everything about the man told me he was basically a sociopath. I was even concerned because I had to spend 2 nights with this man in the same room. And I slept literally with one eye open because I questioned his sexual orientation. After putting together a deal with the Chinese, I had already invested several $1,000s of my own money. Alex Houston invested several thousand of his own money, traversing back and forth across to the Pacific Rim countries, because not only did I tell the Chinese that we could perform and do this and this and this, but I could pre-sell the product. So I went to the Philippines. I went all over the world in the Pacific Rim area selling this product. And we had quite a lot of sales before we even had a production facility located in that area. We had subcontracted 2 production facilities in this country. Well, immediately after signing that agreement, joint venture company agreement with the Chinese, and I failed to mention, the Chinese military owns the mining industry. And I was working with the Chinese military. And they told me in the very beginning that they were going to look me over real hard. They did. And immediately after signing, I mean minutes, I was approached by not a very articulate Chinese fellow who presented me with all kinds of red stamped credentials that I really couldn't read. But he looked like a suit. And he proceeded to tell me that he was head of a certain section of Chinese intelligence, very akin to our DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency. And this was the top man. Matter of fact, he proceeded to open up a file on me that immediately sent me into a psychological tailspin because I had been maintaining secrets for a long, long time. And here I was in a foreign country, inside the military complex of a country that really wasn't that friendly with us. And here this man had everything on me. I thought, well, I'm being blackmailed. I've done it again. And I told him, I said, oh. At that point, my mind flooded with every conceivable stupid thought that I could possibly imagine. And they were, thank goodness, all wrong. Because then he pulls the next file out. He said, we're not concerned. We know who you are, Mr. Phillips. We're not concerned with you or your past. We just wanted to let you know that we knew who you are. He wanted to get my attention. And he was very successful. Because then he opened up a file, and the first thing I see in that file was a picture of Alex Houston having sex with a young black boy. I told him, I kind of turned my head, and I said, anybody can produce these kind of pictures. I said, what's the problem? He said, Alex Houston is involved in slavery, child adult pornography, drug muling,